This is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we are going to talk specifically about the new Skull Island television show, which is really incredible, and what it means for Dungeons and Dragons. So, Skull Island just dropped on Netflix, and it has so many markers that I think this show is the future of intellectual properties. And I think a lot of people, there's such a myopic view on Dungeons and Dragons. Like, people watch Dungeons and Dragons, they're like, they look at Dungeons and Dragons, they're like, oh, what's the mechanical rules on this? Mechanical rules are important, right? Like, I understand why people are concerned with Dungeons and Dragons mechanical rules. And there's so much focus on Dungeons and Dragons 2024 core rulebooks. But the reality is, this is not even remotely, it's 1/10 of what Dungeons and Dragons is. Dungeons and Dragons is a global platform at this point, and it literally is responsible for, in my humble opinion, thousands of jobs. Not under Hasbro. There are not thousands of jobs under Hasbro, but that industry actually serves under other industries. Like, I think it'd be fair to say that probably half the polyhedral dice sets that are sold specifically because of are absolutely sold because of Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons alone, right? Like, what else uses polyhedral dice at this point? Nothing. Like, quite literally nothing, right? It's really, they're not used. I guess they're used in edge cases in other industries, but it's extremely rare, right? So, so Skull Island, let's talk about what Skull Island is. And there's spoilers for Skull Island in this. So it is an animated television show that actually connects to the Godzilla vs. Kong universe, right? This Monarch organization universe. And so this is an intellectual property where, filled with kaiju, right? Mothra and Godzilla and King Kong, and there was, a very epic King Kong versus Godzilla movie. Billy Bobby Brown is in it. It's tremendous. Like, it's really something, right? But what's really fascinating about Skull Island is this show comes forward and it drops down like it is canon. It is canon, right, to the world, right? And it actually pays attention to every detail of every film that's come out beforehand, and it's adding to the canon of the intellectual property, and it's taking from the canon of the intellectual property. And this is the point. If you have an intellectual property and you don't have canon at this point, none of the esoteric thought leaders of today are going to take your intellectual property seriously. And the reality is, there are, Star Wars and Harry Potter and the Monarch, Godzilla, King Kong world, and these are very real and very distinct. And there is this, specific, we need to pay attention to this, and we need to give this, its due, right? And that's really interesting, and I think that's fresh and that's new, right? And I think, and this is exactly where we're heading with Dungeons and Dragons. Now, in many ways, Dungeons and Dragons is already here. We have these live-action movies, and that is in the same canon world. That's Forgotten Realms, right? But Legends of Vox Machina, that is in a D&D canon world. That is Exandria. Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. These are stories happening within the Dungeons and Dragons canon worlds, right? And Skull Island is saying, and what's really fascinating about Skull Island is what it's doing with the intellectual property and how powerful its actions are, right? Because the reality is, it's animated, but it's mixing with live action. And we've also just saw this with Marvel Cinematic Universe. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is saying our live action, our canon spans across animated and expands across live action. And I'm really proud of Dungeons and Dragons to be in this space, right? Like, you have the Saturday morning cartoons, and you have Legends of Vox Machina. All of that is all of that is happening in canon Dungeons and Dragons worlds, and that's incredible, right? And so Skull Island is 5 out of 5 stars. You have to watch it, but it also is answering this question of how do we get young viewers to watch intellectual properties that old viewers are interested in. And I truly believe that the future of Dungeons & Dragons, it's absolutely critical that we engage young viewers. And animated shows is really what engages publishers today because they have the budget to put in whatever the writers can think. Whereas as soon as you go to live action, the budget scales incredibly high to do anything with serious action. You're seeing this with Secret Invasion right now. So I really think that if you watch Skull Island, that show is safe and viewable by a young viewer, but it's also really engaging for an old viewer. And I think our future as Dungeons & Dragons is going to be these mixed intellectual properties. And then last, again, the OSR and indie are so far behind. They don't have any intellectual properties that are getting any attention on the big or small screen, and it's one of the reasons why their games suck and nobody wants to play them, right? And why increasingly we should be on Dungeons & Dragons. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.